Have you ever found yourself sitting in your study, staring at a Greek sentence that is just so heavily parsed,
Oh,
so meticulously color-coded that you've completely lost the actual message of the text? Like, picture it. Your coffee went cold 2 hours ago.
the classic scenario.
Right. You are desperately trying to craft a 40-minute sermon for this coming Sunday, and you've anchored your entire theological premise on a single, isolated verb.
Just one word.
Exactly. You've got the tense, the voice, the mood. You know it's an aorist passive indicative.
Hmm?
And you are standing there with your exegetical wrench trying to squeeze a profound, life-altering message out of the morphology of that one solitary word.
It is a profoundly relatable pain point. I mean, I think every single person who has ever taken a biblical language class has been in exactly that chair.
Yep.
And the reason we end up there is because traditional Greek pedagogy, the way most of us were taught, often treats the New Testament as if it were a specimen on a microscope slide.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. We are taught to dissect the text. We go word by word, morpheme by morpheme. We isolate the verb, we label it with a grammatical tag, we categorize it, and then we pat ourselves on the back and think, well, we've done exegesis.
We did the work.
But in the process of that microscopic dissection, we often completely forget that this text isn't a dead specimen. It's a living, breathing discourse.
That is the perfect way to frame it. You get so hyper-focused on the microscopic view that you entirely miss the choreography of the passage. You miss the dance.
Exactly.
So that is our mission for this deep dive today. We are looking at a brilliant synthesis of two incredibly powerful linguistic frameworks. And the goal here is to completely shift how you outline, how you read, and how you preach the biblical text.
It's a massive shift.
Massive. Whether you are an MDiv student desperately trying to finish an exegesis paper at 2 a.m., or a pastor getting ready to step into the pulpit, or just a biblical scholar looking to sharpen your tools, we want to bridge the huge gap between abstract linguistics and the practical reality of understanding the text.
We really are looking at a monumental synthesis today. On one hand, we are pulling from Chapter 7 of Halliday and Matheson's Introduction to Functional Grammar.
Right.
This is the chapter that outlines the architecture of language, specifically focusing on a concept they call the clause complex within Systemic Functional Linguistics, which we'll just refer to as SFL for short.
And just to set the stage for our listeners who might not have a linguistics degree on their wall, SFL was originally designed for modern languages, like English.
Right, it was, yeah. But that brings us to the second half of our source material today. We have a rigorous discourse analysis document that takes this modern SFL framework and applies it directly to the Greek New Testament.
Which is fascinating.
And it doesn't just do that in a vacuum. It explicitly integrates it with Constantine Campbell's model of Greek verbal aspect. So we are taking modern structural linguistics and marrying it to cutting-edge Koine Greek scholarship.
And I should mention, as we get into the Koine Greek today, we're going to try to keep this feeling like a chat between colleagues over coffee. We'll be using standard Erasmian pronunciation for the Greek terms, just to keep things grounded in the seminary classroom standard.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to avoid getting bogged down in, impenetrable jargon.
Right. No one wants a dry lecture.
Exactly. If we do use a technical term, we are going to break it down. So let's start building this house. Where do we even begin with systemic functional linguistics? What is the core idea that changes our exegesis?
To really grasp how SFL changes our approach, we have to start with how it views language fundamentally.
Okay.
SFL doesn't treat language as a set of rigid, arbitrary rules that you just memorize to avoid making a mistake.
Yeah.
Instead, it views language as a network of choices for making meaning.
A network of choices.
Yes, it's intensely focused on function. How does a specific linguistic choice function to create meaning in a specific social context? And Halliday and Matheson argue that if you want to understand the flow of a discourse, like the actual message being communicated, you cannot just look at isolated clauses.
We can't just parse the verb.
Right. You have to look at how clauses combine. You have to look at the clause complex. And to understand SFL, you have to think about their idea of the rank scale.
The rank scale. Like nested Russian dolls.
Exactly like nested Russian dolls. You have morphemes nested inside words, words nested inside phrases, phrases inside clauses. But today, we are looking at the biggest doll, the clause complex.
Okay, let's slow down right there. Clause complex.
Yeah.
In traditional grammar, we'd probably just call that a compound or complex sentence, wouldn't we?
Loosely, yes. But Halliday makes a crucial distinction that goes much, much deeper than just labeling a sentence complex. He divides structural organization into two broad categories:
Okay, hit me.
multivariate constituent structures and univariate iterative structures.
Oh boy.
I know. It sounds like incredibly dense jargon, but I promise this distinction is the bedrock of everything else we will discuss today.
I'm going to need an analogy for that because multivariate constituent structures sounds like a math problem I would aggressively avoid in high school.
Fair enough.
If I'm trying to picture a multivariate structure, what am I looking at?
Think of a multivariate structure like the human body.
Okay.
You have distinct organs and parts: a head, a torso, arms, legs. Each part has a fundamentally different function, right? But they all work together to make a single entity.
Right. The arm does arm things, the leg does leg things.
Exactly. In language, that is your basic subject, verb, object sentence. John hit the ball. The subject, John, is functioning differently than the verb hit, which is functioning differently than the object, ball.
Distinct parts.
Right. Distinct parts, different functions, forming one single clause. That is multivariate.
I see. So it has multiple variables, multiple distinct slots that do different jobs. But a univariate structure, a clause complex, has to be different. It's not about different functional slots. I actually like to think of a univariate structure like a freight train.
Oh, a freight train is an absolutely stellar analogy for this. Let's run with that.
Right, because in a univariate structure, a clause complex, you don't have fundamentally different functional organs like subject and object. Instead, you have an iterative sequence.
Yes.
You have things linked together in a chain, one after the other, just like a train is made up of cars linked together.
And this brings us to the first major axis we have to understand when analyzing a clause complex, which is taxes.
Taxes, as in syntax.
Related, yeah.
Yeah.
Taxes refers to the degree of interdependency between the clauses in that train.
Okay.
How much do these train cars rely on each other to stay on the tracks? And taxes gives an author two distinct options for coupling those cars together. The first option is parataxis.
Okay, keeping the train analogy going, how does parataxis work?
Parataxis is a string of equal boxcars hitched together. They are of equal status. Neither one is inherently subservient to the other.
So they're just rolling down the track together.
Right. In the SFL notation, we label these with simple numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Both the initiating clause boxcar 1 and the continuing clause boxcar 2 are freestanding. They could theoretically exist on their own, but the author chose to couple them together.
So an English example would be something like, he walked into the room and he sat down. Clause 1. He walked into the room. Clause 2. He sat down. Equal weight. They're just sequential boxcars.
Exactly. They're on equal footing, but an author doesn't always want equal footing.
Right.
Sometimes they want to bury information or make one idea entirely dependent on another. And that brings us to the second option for taxes, which is hypotaxis.
Right. So if parataxis is a line of equal boxcars, hypotaxis would be, well, it would be like a flatbed train car that is carrying a piece of dependent cargo tied down to it.
Oh, that's good.
You have a main dominant clause, the flatbed itself, and then you have a dependent clause, the cargo, that relies entirely on the flatbed to move. If the flatbed derails, the cargo goes with it. The cargo has no wheels of its own.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. Hypotaxis links clauses of unequal status. And because they are unequal, we abandon the numbers in our notation.
What do we use instead?
SFL uses Greek letters. The dominant freestanding clause, your flatbed, is labeled alpha. The dependent clause, your tied-down cargo, which exists only to qualify or modify the dominant one, is labeled beta.
So if I string them together, I might have an alpha, a beta, a gamma. But they don't have to be in alphabetical order, do they? Like the cargo can sit on the front or the back of the flatbed.
That's a really vital point. The dependent clause might come first in the sentence. For instance, when he walked into the room, he sat down. The clause when he walked into the room cannot stand on its own. It is dependent cargo. That is your beta clause. He sat down is your dominant flatbed. That is your alpha clause. So the sequence there is actually beta, then alpha.
I love how the source material refers to this entire process as choreography. Clause complexing choosing between equal boxcars or dependent cargo is how an author choreographs the rhetorical development of a text in real time.
It really is.
It's like the SFL notation, that 1, 2, 3, or the alpha, beta, is essentially a musical score for the flow of the discourse. It shows us exactly where the author is speeding the narrative up, where they are slowing down to emphasize a point, where they are prioritizing theology, or where they are just, burying background information.
It's a musical score, absolutely. But taxes, just knowing whether the relationship is equal or unequal, is only half the equation. We know the train cars are hitched together, but we don't know what kind of connection they have.
Okay, so what's the other half?
This is the second axis of the clause complex, logico-semantic relations. SFL divides these semantic relationships into two massive categories, expansion and projection.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm tracking this because this is where the notation can get a little intimidating for an audio listener. If taxes is how the train cars are physically hitched together, logico-semantic relations are what the cars are doing to each other in terms of meaning.
Exactly.
So let's take expansion first. What are we expanding?
Expansion is exactly what it sounds like. One clause expands on the meaning of another, and there are three specific flavors of this, which Halliday labels elaborating, extending, and enhancing.
Elaborating, extending, enhancing. Okay, let's break them down.
Elaborating is represented in the notation by an equal sign. This is when a clause restates, clarifies, or exemplifies another clause. It's basically saying the same thing, just in a different way. Clause 1 equals clause 2.
So like, I loathe it. I absolutely hate it.
Yes. Or in a hypotactic structure where alpha equals beta, you often see this in non-defining relative clauses, like, my brother, who is a doctor, called me. The dependent clause, who is a doctor, just elaborates on the identity of the brother. It equals the brother.
Got it. Equal sign for elaborating. What about the next one?
The next is extending, represented by a plus sign. This is when you aren't just restating, you are adding brand new information, offering an exception, or providing an alternative. A paratactic extension is your classic and or but joining two independent clauses. Boxcar 1 plus Boxcar 2, John ran away and Fred stayed behind.
Plus sign for extending. Adding new boxcars.
Right.
And the final flavor of expansion.
Enhancing. We represent this with a multiplication sign or an X. This is when a clause qualifies another clause with circumstantial features. It adds time, place, cause, condition, or concession.
So it's multiplying the meaning by giving it a specific environment, like John ran away because he was scared. In our train analogy, John ran away is the dominant flatbed, the alpha. Because he was scared is the dependent cargo, the beta.
Right.
And it's an enhancing beta because it gives the cause.
Yep.
So the notation would be alpha times beta.
Precisely. Now, contrast all of that expansion with the second major category, which is projection.
Okay.
Projection is entirely different. We are no longer just expanding on a phenomenon in the real world. Projection is when one clause projects another through a verbal or mental process. We're dealing with a representation of a representation. Halliday calls it a metaphenomenon.
The source document uses an analogy here that I think is incredibly helpful for this. It says this is exactly like reading a comic strip.
Yes, I love that one.
Right. Expansion, the elaborating, extending, enhancing, is the sequence of panels moving the story forward physically. Panel 1, Panel 2, Panel 3. But projection is when a character in the panel opens their mouth and a speech balloon pops out, or they think something and a little thought cloud appears.
That comic strip analogy perfectly captures the shift in meaning. If it's a speech balloon quoted or reported speech, we call that a locution. In SFL notation, we mark it with double quotation marks.
Okay.
John said, I am running away. The clause, I am running away, is a projected locution. If it's a thought, cloud quoted or reported thought, belief or knowledge, we call that an idea. We mark it with single quotation marks. John thought he would run away.
Okay, so we have this incredibly robust, almost mathematical architecture for mapping out how clauses relate to one another. Parataxis and hypotaxis, elaborating, extending, enhancing, speech balloons, and thought clouds. But if I'm an MDiv student listening to this, I'm probably raising my hand in the back of the classroom right now. SFL is a fascinating linguistic theory, but it was built largely for English. What does this have to do with preaching the Greek New Testament?
The million-dollar question.
Because Koine Greek verbs are notoriously complex. How does this beautiful SFL architecture survive contact with the Greek verbal system?
That is the pivotal question. And it's where the discourse analysis document we are looking at does its most groundbreaking work. Because to analyze the Greek New Testament properly, you cannot use SFL on its own.
It breaks down.
Oh, completely. If you try to map English linguistic assumptions onto Greek verbs, the whole architecture collapses. You have to map SFL onto a highly accurate model of the Greek verbal system. And the sources argue that the most accurate model available right now is Constantine Campbell's model of Greek verbal aspect.
And this is going to be a massive paradigm shift for a lot of our listeners. If you were trained in older grammars, The ones that taught you that Greek verbs are primarily indicators of objective time. Campbell's model is going to rattle your cage a bit.
It absolutely will. So let's define verbal aspect according to Campbell. Aspect is subjective viewpoint.
Subjective viewpoint.
Yes. It is the rhetorical perspective from which an author chooses to present an action. It is heavily dependent on the author's choice, regardless of the objective chronological reality of how that event actually occurred in history.
Wait, hold on. I want to press pause right here, because if I go into my pulpit on Sunday and tell my congregation the Greek verb here doesn't mean past tense, half of them are going to think I'm questioning the historical reality of the resurrection.
Right, right.
We have to be very careful here. If aspect is just viewpoint, what are the viewpoints?
Campbell argues for a strict binary aspectual contrast. You only have two choices of viewpoint. On one side, you have perfective aspect, which in Greek is primarily carried by the aorist tense.
Okay, perfect.
Perfective aspect presents an action from the outside. It views the action as a complete whole, a summary, or an end view. It does not mean the action happened in an instant. It doesn't mean it was a punctiliar flash in the pan. It means the author is choosing to view the entire event as a single, complete package.
The classic seminary analogy here is the helicopter versus the parade, right?
Oh, exactly.
Perfective aspect, the aorist tense, is like hovering in a news helicopter 1,000 feet above a parade route. You look down, and you see the entire parade from the first float to the last marching band as one complete unit.
Yep.
You don't see the individual marchers putting one foot in front of the other. You aren't experiencing the progression of the parade. You just see the parade as a singular entity.
A phenomenal analogy. Now contrast that helicopter view with the second option, imperfective aspect. This encompasses the present, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect tense forms in Greek.
All of them.
All of them. Imperfective aspect presents an action from the inside. It views the action as an ongoing process, a continuous activity, or a state in motion.
To stick with the parade analogy, imperfective aspect is like standing on the sidewalk watching that same parade go by.
Right.
You are down on the street level, inside the action. You are watching the floats pass you. You are hearing the brass section of the band. You might be catching candy thrown from a car. You are experiencing the internal progression of the event. It's an internal viewpoint.
And we should note a critical controversy here. Campbell explicitly rejects the older tripartite system of aspect. Many traditional grammars treat the perfect and pluperfect tenses as a distinct third aspect.
Like a stative aspect.
Exactly, a stative aspect representing a past action with continuing present results. Campbell argues that is a fundamental misunderstanding. He argues that the perfect tense actually carries imperfective aspect, so it's an internal sidewalk viewpoint, but it combines that imperfective aspect with what he calls high spatial proximity.
Spatial proximity. Okay, this is where the aspect theory gets really dynamic, almost cinematic. Campbell maps these two viewpoints, the helicopter and the sidewalk, onto a spatial axis. So an imperfective aspect, a sidewalk view, can be close up, or it can be far away. Spatial proximity foregrounds the action. It pushes it right up to the camera lens. It gives it immediate discourse prominence. And Campbell says this proximity is carried by the present and perfect tenses. They bring the action right up close to the reader's face.
It is deeply cinematic. Conversely, spatial remoteness places the action at a conceptual or narrative distance. It pushes it to the background.
Right.
This remoteness is carried by the imperfect and pluperfect, which are remote but still viewed from the sidewalk, inside the action, and the aorist, which is remote and viewed from the helicopter, outside the action.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Aye.
I am a pastor. I've been preaching for 20 years. I'm trying to synthesize all this.
Lay it on me.
If aspect is strictly just viewpoint helicopter versus sidewalk, and spatial proximity close-up versus far away, I have a massive problem. How on earth do I preach temporal sequence? How do I get cause and effect? How do I establish theological conditions? If you're telling me that Greek verbs don't strictly tell time, if I can't preach the pastness of the aorist or the unending continuous nature of the present as an objective temporal reality, haven't I just lost my entire exegetical toolkit? How do we know what happened and when?
That is the defining question of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
And answering it leads us directly to the aha moment of this synthesis between Halliday and Campbell.
I'm ready for the aha moment.
The answer to your panic is a concept called the division of labor. This is precisely why you cannot use Campbell's aspect in a vacuum, and why you cannot use SFL without a rigorous view of the verb. If you rely only on the verb, you suffer from what the discourse document calls a spectral overloading.
A spatial overloading, I love that term, means we are asking the poor little Greek verb to do way more heavy lifting than it was ever designed to do.
Way more.
We are making it carry the time, the cause, the condition, and the theology all on its tiny morphological shoulders.
Exactly. Pastors and scholars often erroneously force temporal, causal, or conditional meanings directly into the Greek verb tenses themselves. You hear it in sermons all the time.
Oh, constantly.
A pastor will stand up and say, because this verb is in the present tense, it means a continuous, unending action in time that causes this other theological reality. But the source material argues those meanings. The objective time, the cause, the condition do not belong to the verb's aspect.
But where do they belong? Where do I find the time and the logic?
You find them in the SFL logico-semantic relations.
Oh, wow.
Yes, they belong to the architecture of the clause complex. It is the taxes and the logico-semantics, the alpha and beta, the elaborating, extending, enhancing relations that choreograph the structural logic of the passage. The structural conjunctions, the prepositions, the way the clauses are hitched together, that is what gives you the sequence, the cause, and the condition.
Let me make sure I am grasping the magnitude of this division of labor. You are saying the SFL architecture, the train track, and the coupling between the cars tells me how the events relate to each other in time and logic.
Yes.
And the Greek verb.
The verb just dictates the viewpoint and the prominence. The verb is the camera. The SFL structure tells you the objective reality of the events. The Campbellian verb tells you how the author wants you to subjectively experience those events, whether they are foregrounded, backgrounded, viewed as complete summaries from a helicopter, or ongoing processes from the sidewalk.
This is revolutionary for sermon prep. It really is.
Yeah.
It means you stop obsessing over trying to find a hidden mystical theology in the morphology of a single verb. You stop trying to preach a 40-minute sermon on an aorist passive indicative.
Please stop doing that.
Instead, you start looking at how that verb functions within the architectural scaffolding of the entire paragraph. SFL provides the structural scaffolding. Aspect provides the cinematic lighting.
Scaffolding and lighting, that is a beautiful way to synthesize it. And the only way to prove how powerful this is to actually use it. Let's take this theoretical synthesis out of the classroom and apply it to the text. Let's look at the pulpit payoff.
Let's do it.
Let's dive into some actual Greek New Testament exegesis, starting with the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 14.
Oh, this is the perfect test case. The theological weight of John 1.14 is immense. In Greek, we have kai ho logos sark egeneito kai eskonjusen en hamen, kai etheathameta, ton doxan auto, doxan hus monogenes para patros, pleies charitos kai alatias.
Beautiful.
In English. And the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth.
It is arguably one of the most profound Christological statements in all of Scripture. Now, let's not just read it. Let's map the SFL structural notation first. Look at how John hitches these clauses together.
Okay, looking at the structural joints.
The text gives us 3 initiating clauses of equal status. And the Word became flesh is clause 1. And tabernacled among us is a paratactic extension, so we notate that as +2. And we beheld his glory is another paratactic extension, so that is +3. But we will label that 1 + 3 alpha because it becomes the dominant flatbed for what follows.
So we have our freight train moving at high speed, 3 boxcars hitched together, 1 + 2 + 3, equal weight, moving the narrative forward.
Right.
And now we look at the cargo inside those boxcars, the verbs. Egeneto became, eskonjusen tabernacled, ethiosemitha beheld. According to Campbell's model, all 3 of these verbs are aorist, which means they possess perfective aspect with spatial remoteness.
Right. They are perfective. The author is in the helicopter. John is presenting these monumental cosmos-altering events, the incarnation, the dwelling of God among humanity, the historical apostolic witness from the outside.
As a whole.
He is viewing them as complete, summary historical milestones. He isn't giving us a day-by-day diary of Jesus pitching a tent. He is summarizing the entirety of the incarnation as a unified whole.
But the brilliance of John is that the sentence doesn't end there. After that rapid-fire chain of perfective aorists, 1 + 2 + 3, John suddenly shifts gears structurally. He abandons parataxis and moves abruptly into hypotaxis.
Yes, the big shift.
He drops a dependent beta clause onto the text to elaborate on the concept of glory. Glory as of the only begotten from the Father. That's a hypotactic elaboration marked as +3 = beta. And then he extends that dependent thought even further, full of grace and truth. plus 3 plus beta.
This is where the structural logic dictates the preaching rhythm. I want our listeners who preach to really hear this. Notice what John is doing with the architecture of the language. He builds a paratactic additive chain, the 1, 2, 3 to build a rapid summary progression. Boom, boom, boom. The word became flesh, tabernacled, we beheld.
It's narrative subsequence. He is moving the timeline of redemptive history forward very quickly, using the perfective aspect.
Yeah.
He wants you to see the broad strokes of the historical reality.
Yes. But then he immediately shifts into hypotaxis. That introduces elaboration and extension dependent on that final point of glory. Why? To intentionally pause the narrative momentum.
He violently hits the brakes on the train.
Exactly. He forces the reader to stop looking at the sequential timeline of events and to contemplate the qualitative character of the glory he just introduced. He wants you to sit in the reality that this glory is full of grace and truth.
This changes everything about how you outline a sermon on this text. If a pastor only parsed a genito, if they only looked at the word became in a vacuum, they would completely miss this architectural contrast.
They've missed the whole point.
They might preach a 40-minute philosophical sermon on the theology of becoming and the metaphysics of the incarnation, but they miss the fact that the grammar itself is choreographing a moment of theological awe. The SFL structure tells you exactly how to pace your delivery. You speed through the historical reality, the aorist parataxis, specifically to get to the lingering, awestruck contemplation of his grace and truth in the hypotaxis. The theology isn't just floating in the vocabulary words, it is physically baked into the clause complex.
You said it perfectly. You are preaching the structure as much as you are preaching the words. When you preach John 1.14, your congregation should feel the brakes hitting. Let's look at an even more complex example of this structural suspense.
Okay, where to?
Let's turn a few pages over to the expository prologue of 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. This is a text that gives translators actual nightmares.
Oh, this is a legendary sentence.
Yeah.
In English, it usually reads something like, "What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we looked upon and our hands touched concerning the word of life, we declare to you also."
It is famous for being one long, breathless, winding, almost grammatically chaotic sentence. But when we apply SFL, the chaos disappears, and we see a masterpiece of suspense. Let's map the SFL structure. John does something incredible here.
I'm looking at it now.
He stacks multiple embedded, dependent, relative clauses right at the start. These are all hypotactic elaborations. What was from the beginning is your first dependent clause equals beta 1. What we have heard is equals beta 2. What we have seen is equals beta 3. What we looked upon is equals beta 4, clause 1, and our hands touched is a paratactic extension inside that dependent clause, so beta 4 plus 2.
Notice what is conspicuously missing from all of those stacked clauses. We have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, beta 4.
The main verb.
Right.
The dominant primary alpha clause, the flatbed that all this cargo is supposed to be sitting on, doesn't actually appear until verse 3. We declare to you also, a pangelamon.
John builds unbearable structural tension by stacking these hypotactic descriptive elaborations. He is holding the main clause hostage.
That's masterful.
Now, layer Campbell's spectral analysis over this SFL structural suspense, because it takes it to another level entirely. Look at how John masterfully moves the cinematic camera across the spatial axis.
Trace the verbs with me. He starts with, what was from the beginning? The verb is ein, and imperfect. The imperfect carries imperfective aspect with spatial remoteness.
So we are on the inside of an ongoing state, the sidewalk view, but it is pushed way, way back into the distant past.
Yes. He establishes the eternal, ongoing, remote state of the word. It's a distant reality. But then he violently shifts the camera to establish his own apostolic authority. What we have heard, akoamen, and what we have seen, hisrakamen. These are perfect tense verbs.
And remember, Campbell rejects the idea that the perfect is a unique state of aspect. He says these perfects carry imperfective aspect, so we are still on the sidewalk inside the action, but with high spatial proximity.
This is where it clicks. John is not just saying, oh, by the way, we heard this in the past and the result continues to today. That's the old wooden way of parsing it.
Yeah.
No, he is using spatial proximity to bring that past historical hearing and seeing into vivid, immediate foreground prominence for his audience.
He is grabbing the reader by the collar.
Exactly. Thrusting his apostolic sensory authority right into their faces.
It is a profoundly aggressive use of aspect. But then he shifts axis a third time. What we looked upon, iphiexamika, and our hands touched, ipsilophizon. These are aorists, Perfective aspect with spatial remoteness.
Right.
Let me make sure I'm following the camera moves. Having established his immediate proximate authority through the perfects, he drops back into a summary external perspective with the aorists. He takes the helicopter view of very specific historical moments in time when they contemplated and physically touched the incarnate Jesus.
Yes. He moves from a remote, ongoing state with the imperfect to a proximate, ongoing experience with the perfect, to remote, summary, historical snapshots with the aorist. And where does all this aspectual movement and structural suspense finally culminate? Where does the tension break?
It breaks in the alpha clause, the dominant matrix clause in verse 3. We declare to you also. The verb is a pendulum, present tense, imperfective aspect with spatial proximity. He establishes the main declaration as an ongoing, prominent internal activity happening right now in front of the reader.
So let's ask the critical pastoral question. What does this mean for the person trying to exegete this passage? How does mapping this out prevent an exegetical fallacy?
Well, thinking about how I've heard this preached, the most common fallacy is to flatten the text out, to treat all the verbs as equally important. A pastor might look at the Greek, see the aorist verb for touched, epsilophasin, and decide to preach an entire 45-minute sermon on the theology of touching Jesus. They make that dependent relative clause the main point of the sermon.
And the discourse analysis shows us that is a complete structural violation of the text.
Exactly.
The touching, the seeing, the hearing, those are all hypotactic. They're structurally dependent. They're held in a holding pattern. They are the cargo on the flatbed. They aren't the engine pulling the train.
The grammar itself creates a holding pattern of sensory authority before delivering the main event. We declare. The declaration is the alpha clause. The declaration has immediate spatial proximity. And this is exactly how the text should be delivered from the pulpit. The suspense in the grammar must translate to suspense in the sermon, culminating in the urgency of the declaration.
Yes.
You don't preach a sermon on touching. You preach a sermon on the urgency of declaring the word of life, authenticated by the fact that the apostles touched him.
It is so vital that the theology of the text is physically modeled by the syntax. If you ignore the syntax, you mute the theology.
Well said.
Okay, let's look at one final example from 1 John to see how this framework handles conditional logic and ethical imperatives. Turn to 1 John 1.6. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in the darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth.
This is a fantastic text for demonstrating how SFL handles conditions alongside projection. Let's break down the structural notation. We start with, if we say this is a hypotactic enhancement, it sets up a condition, we'll call it times beta 1 alpha.
And notice what is embedded inside that condition. A projection, a locution. We are projecting what the hypothetical hypocrite is saying, that we have fellowship with him. That's a projected quotation, marked with the double quotes.
Then John adds a paratactic extension to the condition, and walk in the darkness. So the whole hypotactic scenario he's building is, if we say X and yet we actually do Y.
And then comes the hammer. The dominant primary clause, the alpha clause, is actually a double paratactic assessment. Alpha 1, we lie. Alpha plus 2, and do not practice the truth.
Now let's look at the Campbellian aspectual contrast here, because it is incredibly revealing. Look at the verb used for making the claim. If we say Eichmann, it is an aorist subjunctive perfective aspect.
Right.
John presents the hypothetical speech act externally as a complete summary condition. It's just a snapshot of a verbal claim from a helicopter. It's cheap talk.
But contrast that cheap talk with the verbs used for the conduct and the ethical reality. Walk in the darkness, peripatemen, is present subjunctive, imperfective aspect. It's viewed from the inside, from the sidewalk, as an ongoing lived-in process. And look at the main verbs, the alpha assessment, we lie, pseudometha, and do not practice, poiemen. These are present indicatives. They carry imperfective aspect with high spatial proximity.
So what is John doing here rhetorically? He is setting up a devastating test case. He contrasts the summary, almost dismissive act of making a verbal claim, the aorist saying, with the ongoing, internal, deeply lived reality of walking in darkness, the present walking.
And by putting the main verbs, we lie and do not practice the truth, in the present tense, he is giving them massive spatial proximity. He is thrusting them into the foreground. He is placing the reader face to face with the immediate reality of ethical falsehood. The false state of the hypocrite isn't some remote theoretical concept kept at a distance. It's given immediate foregrounded moral prominence. It is in your face.
The grammar literally doesn't allow you to distance yourself from the hypocrisy. The aspectual choices force the ethical imperative right into the foreground of the discourse.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we always want to ask the ultimate so what question. We have spent an hour unpacking multivariate structures, logico-semantic relations, and spatial axes. What does this all mean for you, the listener?
I think we've seen how integrating Halliday's SFL with Campbell's aspect fundamentally repairs our relationship with the Greek text. We move away from viewing verbs as isolated, mechanical time-telling machines, and we start seeing them as rhetorical spotlights moving around within a beautifully constructed architectural framework.
If we were to summarize the core findings of this integration, it comes down to that division of labor. SFL accounts for the structural and interdependency, the taxes, whether clauses are paratactic or hypotactic, and the semantic relations like expansion or projection. SFL builds the house. It lays the tracks for the train.
And Campbell's aspectual model accounts for the viewpoint perfective or imperfective, and the discourse prominence, proximity, or remoteness. It tells us where the author is placing the camera and whether they are zooming in or zooming out on the actions happening inside that house.
Exactly. Together, they prevent aspectual overloading. You no longer have to force temporal or causal meanings into verb tenses. You let the SFL logico-semantic relations do that heavy lifting. And by tracking the shifts between parataxis and hypotaxis, alongside the shifts in spatial proximity and remoteness, you can map exactly how an author builds narrative movement, how they heighten ethical imperatives, and how they highlight core theological declarations.
It shifts our perspective from looking at the Greek text as a static, dead specimen pinned to a board in a laboratory to reading it as a dynamic, living artifact of meaning. You simply cannot separate the what of the theology from the how of the clause complex.
You really can't. The structure is the theology.
We've seen how this choreographs John's writing today, which, if we are being completely honest, is relatively straightforward Greek. John likes short sentences and limited vocabulary, but I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you close your books today. Imagine applying this incredibly robust SFL matrix to the Apostle Paul.
Oh, that is a daunting prospect.
Think about Ephesians chapter 1, where verses 3 through 14 are famously one single, sprawling, massive Greek sentence. It is a labyrinth of dependent relative clauses, participles, and prepositional phrases. It's the longest freight train in the New Testament. How might mapping the parataxes and hypotaxes finally unlock the theology hidden in Paul's massive clause complexes? How might it change the way you preach complex doctrines like predestination, adoption, and redemption if you could definitively see exactly which clauses are the dominant flatbeds and which are just the dependent cargo?
That is a phenomenal question to ponder. Applying this framework to Paul's epistles opens up entirely new dimensions of exegetical discovery. It would revolutionize Pauline studies.
It really would. We'll have to tackle that in a future deep dive. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation today. Whether you are translating in a dorm room or prepping a sermon in your study, may your coffee be hot, and may your clause complexes be ever illuminating. Keep reading, keep studying, and we'll talk to you next time.